Let's talk about that lawsuit being filed by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law. Again, they're alleging that Georgia's no vote policy has held up more than 53,000 voter registration applications, that it is disenfranchising those voters. And as we told you, 70% of that 53,000 African American. Joining us right now is Danielle Lang, Senior Legal Counsel for Voting Rights and Redistricting for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. Danielle, so explain us exactly what is going on here. What is the legal challenge you're filing? How do you hope to be successful in court? Do you file it in state court or federal court?
Great question. I just want to make one clarification because I don't want to overclaim. I work at Campaign Legal Center, which is a partner of Lawyers Committee in this lawsuit, representing the various civil rights groups that have sued. They've sued in federal court, and what they've alleged is very similar to what Ms. Abrams explained. The plaintiffs have alleged, just as the AP report demonstrated, that this exact match policy adds nothing to the security of elections in Georgia, nothing whatsoever, because in order to quote unquote fix this problem, you show ID that you would be required to show at the polls anyhow, and yet it's fast tracking these voters for potential purges, a use it or lose it right, that it disproportionately impacts minority voters. Not only does it disproportionately impact minority voters, but the legislature and Secretary Kemp knew that it would disproportionately impact minority voters when they passed this law in 2017 because of our lawsuit in 2016, where we won a settlement alleging the disproportionate impact of this policy, and then they turned around and passed it into law in 2017. So it has a disproportionate impact that is demonstrable and that the legislature knew about. So we've alleged that this violates the National Voter Registration Act, which says that every completed voter registration application needs to be registered, fully registered to vote, violates the Voting Rights Act because of its discriminatory impact, and it violates the Constitution because it puts up entirely unnecessary barriers to the right to vote. But I do want to repeat what Ms. Abrams said earlier, which is that voters on this list do have the right to vote, and they should not be scared away from using it. If they show up in person and show the necessary photo ID under the Georgia voter ID law, they will be eligible to vote a regular ballot. There's been a lot of misinformation out there about having to vote a provisional ballot. You can vote a regular ballot if you show your photo ID, and that's really important because voters might have to advocate for themselves if poll officials do not, understand or are necessarily well trained on these rules. So it's really important that voters show up in person if they're on this list and show their photo ID. For this upcoming election, what I'm most worried about is how this might affect vote by mail. We've seen a surge in this election of applications for vote by mail in Georgia, particularly among Black voters, and there's no guarantee that those votes will be counted. So I would encourage anyone who's on this list to, vote in person with their photo ID, and while Lawyers Committee and Campaign Legal Center and the groups on the ground fight in court to resolve these problems of vote by mail and other pressing issues for this upcoming election.
So, Danielle, how do we know, though? How does a person know if they're on the list? I mean, is it on a website? Because you're saying that if you're on this list, go vote in person. How do you know?
That's a great question. As Ms. Abrams said, you can go on the Georgia My Voter page online, put in your information, and what should show up, if the system is working correctly, is that you should show up as being registered, but with a kind of asterisk on the top that says, your application is impending and you need to contact your registrar. So if you see that notification, you'll know that you're on the list. Likewise, if you for some reason don't show up at all, that's reason for concern and reason to call your local registrar and make sure that you are on the list, either on the pending list or the regular list, and will be able to vote a regular ballot.
Last question for you, Danielle. Are we seeing any other dastardly acts by Republicans in other states when it comes to messing with folks when it comes to voting?
We're always fighting a wave of voter suppression year in, year out, and that's especially true in tight elections, and this election is no exception. I'm sure that many of your viewers have seen recent reports about issues in Prairie View A&M's campus in Waller County. Waller County has a very long history of discrimination against Black voters and the voters on the A&M campus. They are now having some sort of issue where the county told them to register to a certain address, but that was actually the wrong address, and now they have to change their voter registration in order to be able to vote in the right precinct. We see continuous, really large purge numbers as a result of the Supreme Court's decision earlier this year in an Ohio case, allowing states to essentially implement a use it or lose it policy, where if you don't vote for a few years, you're just removed from the rolls. That appears to be what's happening in Georgia, along with this 53,000, which is why so many people have been purged from the rolls in Georgia in the past few years under Secretary Kemp's administration.
And I want to deal with this Prairie View issue, because you're absolutely right. I'm wearing my Texas A&M shirt because we're playing South Carolina tomorrow. And the reality is, Prairie View is under the Texas A&M University system. It's only about 90 miles from Houston. And Waller County, they have been doing these games. Lawsuits go back decades, because they know full well that the black students at Prairie View could very well determine who the elected officials are in Waller County. And so they have been doing this constantly, trying to keep those black students from impacting politics in Waller County.
Yes, one of my first jobs when I joined the Campaign Legal Center in 2015 was writing a letter to Waller County when they tried to remove all the early voting locations from the Prairie View A&M campus. That thankfully was reversed as a result of advocacy from us and others. But this is a long-term problem in Waller County for the students, and they are currently struggling to find a resolution that will ensure that all of those students who properly registered and followed the county's directions will be permitted to vote on Election Day. So we're following that very closely.
All right, Danielle Lang, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.